My name is Bashura Khatun. I was born in 81, born in this country. I've always been here actually. hmm So I have there's eight of us, seven sisters and one brother. So we have quite a big family actually. My parents came here in the early 80s, I think, when my elder sister was born in when was I born in 1976. So she was about 3 or 4 maybe when she came to the UK, and since after her, the rest of us, so the seven more, we were born in this country.
So,
Um,
do you remember, what was the setting like when you were growing up? Were you brought up in the East End of London or any other places?
yeah, so we've always lived in East London. My parents started off in Shadwell Gardens, I think. They were there, and then my dad's recently been telling us stories about how things were when they first came to the UK. So obviously they had the racism which they faced, and my mum told us about when they were in Hanson House. I think one of my aunties, they used to live together, but they were squatters, so they didn't have housing. Um, they weren't housed from the council. They lived as squatters, and it came to a point where eventually the council gave them the property. So since then, they managed to establish a house, should I say, or a roof over the head. Yeah. So we've had that. So Cylinder Garden, then where did they go? Then we've been in Globe Town. I was born in Globe Town, I think. Yeah,
In Bethnal Green.
Chepter House. Yeah, Bethnal Green. Yeah, and most of my childhood memory is from Globe Town. So I went to Bangabandhu Primary School, Central Foundation Girls School. All of us went there. My brother went to Stepney Green, and then from there, obviously, my teenage years, I worked, and then I got married in 2005. But I still live in Stepney, so my husband's from the Cleachy estate. So yeah, I've been living here since 15 years now, I think.
So, what was your experience like? So, while you're growing up?
Well, it was, how can I put it? Things are a lot different now from when we were raised as children. Obviously, my parents, they don't speak English as much as well as we do, so we we learned to speak Bengali, but there was a lot of restrictions. Whereas now we try and be fair with the kids, and no, what happened was I went to Central Foundation, I went to sixth form, and then I found a job. So I started working in IT, and then what did I do? I worked in IT for about a year, and then I got another job where I worked at the job center. So I was there for a good few years. I got married. I was still working at the job center until 2015. I decided, oh, what shall I do? What shall I do? I wanted a career change. That's when I left and I went to university. I went to King's College and I got my degree in nursing, and I've worked in nursing for 2 years now. I come from a very big family. There was eight of us, and in the family I got married into was my husband and his older brother, whom he didn't live with us, but he had his parents, my father-in-law, my mother-in-law, and it was just me and my husband. So they were my in-laws. They were they were in my grandma's generation, so there was the generation gap between us. But my father-in-law, we lived together for about 2 years, of which 1 year he spent in Bangladesh, but he passed away. And then my mother-in-law, I lived with until 2013. Obviously, before I got married, I was working full time, and after I got married, I took about 3 to 4 months off. My in-laws, they were, like I said, from the older generation, so they weren't used to having the daughter-in-law work, but they were okay with it because I had a good few months of, like I said, and I ended up I did go back to work full time, but then I had my first child, and then I was off, and then I had my second child, and then I went back part time, and then I had about a 3 year gap. Then I had my daughter. So my eldest son, he's 13. My second son, he's 12, and my daughter is 8. Yeah. So I went back part time, and then in 2015 I left the job center, to start my education at King's. That was hard for me because my daughter was very young. Obviously, my kids were at primary age as well, but we managed it. My husband supported me throughout because obviously there was the academics and then there was the placements.
So, what was the reason for changing career to nursing?
Um, Dynamics had changed at the local government, so it was the emphasis was more on what is. I mean, obviously there's the benefit side of things, and then we have the jobs. What people are doing to look for work, and I felt like the emphasis had changed. It was more target driven, and I felt like I wasn't helping people as much as I should. And I've always had this passion for nursing, and it just so happens that in the latter part of my no, sorry, in my last pregnancy, after I had my daughter, it all kind of thought, what am I doing? And I had ideas in my head. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to give it a go. So I started off with the Access course at Tower Hamlets College in 2014. I did evenings, 2 evenings there. And yeah, it just so happens I finished my year. I got quite good marks actually. And then I got into King's and I studied there. So by then, I left the job centre and I thought, financially, if I'm doomed, then I'm doomed. But it was okay. But my husband, obviously, he was supporting us as well. So yeah, because of that, I managed to be where I am here because of him. So that was the 3 years. But before I finished my degree, I started applying for jobs, and it just so happens the Royal London Hospital, they're forever looking for nurses anyway, but I applied for a post in respiratory and cardiac, and I went for my interview in August and I got the job. And I started that in September 2018, and I've been there since.
So, when you say respiratory cardio, do you want to explain briefly what it involves on a day-to-day basis?
Okay, so respiratory, we have patients that have lung disease or any problems with their breathing, asthma, COPD, pulmonary embolisms, for example. So that's the respiratory side of things. And then we have the cardiac patients who have, patients that have heart failure, people that come in with heart attacks, people that need angiograms, any sort of symptoms relating to the heart, they come to us. It's an acute medical ward. I don't do surgery. It's not a surgical ward, so it's very full on. So because we have both the specialities, we need to be knowledgeable on both sides. So it is very busy.
So, do you feel your nursing career is very rewarding?
Yes, definitely, and I love it. It's very rewarding, and I feel like I give back to the community because working at the Royal London Hospital, we do have a lot of people from the Bangladeshi community there, and I feel like I bridge that gap. So we have so many aunties and uncles that don't speak English, and I always advocate for them, and they love it, and I love it as well because I know they have that peace of mind. Oh, do you know what? There's a Bengali nurse on, and even the doctors, they're like, "Oh, Bashura, please come and interpret for us," which I don't mind. They come from other wards for me as well, and there's a very small minority of Bengali nurses within the healthcare setting, and I think we need more,
Okay.
definitely. Because we're a respiratory ward, we knew there was us and our neighbor sister ward who was respiratory as well and infectious diseases. We knew we'd be the first to kind of receive the patients. So when March came in, we all started preparing, but again, it was like the unknown, and we did us, including the doctors, including the site managers, we were like, oh, how are we going to do this? What are we going to do with our first patients that come? So slowly we just started discharging our patients because we knew it was coming quite close. So I think it was mid-March, towards the end of March, we had discharged majority of our patients, and the ones that were still in on our ward, we moved them to a different ward to start accommodating for the COVID patients. So we had our first influx of patients, and initially it was daunting, it was scary because we all you hear is people dying from COVID, and we thought, oh my God, this is going to happen to us as well. So I mean, it was so intense, and because no one knew what they were getting themselves involved with or how to deal with things, it made it that much more intense. So we had patients that came in with query COVID, and we would put them in the side room until their results would come back. And once, if it was a positive result, then we'd cohort them into bays. So we'd have like 4 patients in one bay who were positive. So we can, because obviously we had to wear the PPE and to be working inside rooms. You can imagine you go in with PPE, you come out, you have to take all that off, then go into the next patient with another set of PPE. So that's how we worked it. So the negative patients would take them off the ward. But at that time, we had no negative patients; they were all positive. And it'd be like some patients they'd have the symptoms, but the results would come back negative. But we'd have to reswap them because we knew they'd had COVID, and it was just a matter of getting that positive result. So it probably the second or third swab that we'd get, it was positive. Yeah, so that it was kind of musical beds, should I say? So we check, they come in, we see positive, negative, negative off the ward, positive into the bay. We'd manage them in their bays. So they either, it was a bit of a, because we were the acute medical team, we had patients that came on, you heard about the CPAP, the big face mask that they had to wear. So we had to trial them on that. So the patients that needed oxygen, they were on our ward. The ones that needed the CPAPs and any form of humidified oxygen, they'd be on our ward as well. Now, with these kind of patients, obviously, they're aerosol generated procedures, so we had to be very, very careful. So we had to wear the whole shebang, apron over apron, with the face mask, with the goggles, and everything basically. And it was tough because we would literally feel sweat dropping from our faces and bodies inside everything. So it was really, really tough. But even okay, so that was that, and then if patients were getting better, we'll take them off the ward to a different ward where they would be ready for getting discharged. So this is when they're off oxygen. So once they've weaned off oxygen, we move them to a different ward. But we had our critical care team, they were readily available all the time. We had consultants on the ward, we had all our doctors on the ward, and the thing about COVID is patients they deteriorate so quickly. One it literally takes 10 minutes. So 1 minute they're okay on say 2 liters of nasal cannula, the oxygen through the nose, and then the next minute they'd be desaturating. Their saturation levels would go down, and they need the CPAP, the mask, and even with that they're unable to keep up the oxygen levels, and we'd have to take them to intensive care. So it was so busy. It was mad. It was exhausting. I mean, on top of that, we had the palliative patients as well. I think that was the worst that every one of us, we all felt it, because we had patients that died with us without their family being present. And it was horrible, horrible, honestly, because, we'd offered for the one person to come in, but then the family isolated as well. My first patient that died with COVID, I still remember him to this day. And it was horrible because we offered for his son to come, and he said, look, we're all isolating. His mum was elderly as well. And he 3 days I looked after him, and on the third day he died with me, and he was on his own. And before he left, in the evening, he's like, oh, he smiled and he said, I just want to go home. And I told him, I said, oh, I wish you could, but you're very unwell. What do you say to them? And we knew he was going to die. It was just a matter of time. And yeah, he slipped away, but he was on his own. I think that's the hard bit that everyone had to, that's a harsh reality that we all had to face. I mean, in the hospital, we during the peak, we saw a death more or less every day. There was a time where we had 3 or 4 deaths in one day. And, even our neighboring wards, we'd hear, oh, so and so many patients died. Again, with intensive care, there was the same setting, but because intensive care, it's different to where we were. We were able to see the number of deaths, but not so much about how, what the turnaround was or how things worked. But with the wards, obviously, we allowed that one family member in, whereas in intensive care, because it was all COVID, no one was allowed to go in. Even we had restrictions as well. So if we were going to transfer a patient from our ward to say intensive care, we had to. There was a process, and yeah, it was quite a rigorous process actually.
So it's more like a one-way ticket, isn't it?
It is. I mean, obviously we've had a lot of recoveries saying that from intensive care, and we're still having the patients recovering, and they're coming down to us from intensive care. So there is a lot of good news stories. Because obviously I was in a COVID ward and I didn't want to put anyone else at risk. Again, with my neighbours as well. Obviously, I think everyone was doing that anyway, but I just kind of kept myself to myself. But again, me, I was exposing myself, my husband, and my kids. My husband was positive, by the way. He did have COVID. We both did, yeah, but he was in. He got tested. His test was positive, but he had the fever. He wasn't so bad. A fever, and he was okay. Well, he had slight shortness of breath, but nothing too much. And I just had a headache for like a sinus headache for 5 days. They were my symptoms. But my test came back negative. So, but I don't believe it was negative. I'm sure it was positive. Yeah, it was because we were home and we weren't allowed to go back. So I did a lot of deep cleaning, as you can imagine. Yeah, and my sisters that lived close by, and they did our groceries for us. But yeah, it was nice because we knew we couldn't go. I knew I couldn't go to work. He knew he couldn't go to work as well, and it was just me and the kids. And I mean, the first few days I did isolate him when he had the symptoms, but it's so difficult, honestly, especially when you're living with kids, to isolate them in a room. In the small little masonette I live in, it was very difficult. So 3 days I had him in isolation. Then I said, after that, I said to him, "Okay, look, you go to the kitchen when we're away and do what you got to do, and then go back to your room." Yeah,